So we're going to need to think back to some unit circle kind of stuff. But just going to be really one slide that you'll need to write down, but I would definitely write it down. And then we're going to do some problems. So that is, we're going to find trig ratios, but we're going to say it's in a specific quadrant. So like if this triangle is in quadrant 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, how does that affect it? Okay, so we're going to assign a positive or negative value to each trig ratio depending on what quadrant it's in. So if you just have a normal coordinate plane, and we have our 4 quadrants and all of them. So this is like your x-axis and this is your y-axis. In each of these 4 quadrants, every trig function is either positive or it's negative. So we're going to start in quadrant 1. Easiest one. And the first thing we're going to do is list all of the positive trig functions in that quadrant. We want to think back. The sign, what is the sign? It's x, y, 1 over x, 1 over y. What is the sign? It's just the y, yep. Cosine is the x, right? Tangent is the y over the x. We'll stop there for now. Right. So in this first quadrant, is sine positive or negative? Yeah, it's positive because if we think about in this quadrant, like say like a point in here, let's say like this one's 2, 2. It'll be positive x and a positive y, right? Anything in this will be positive x and a positive y. So the sine and the cosine are both positive. So sine positive, cosine's positive. What about tangent? It'll be a positive too, right? Because it's an x over y. If those are both positive, it'll be positive. Okay, now let's think about the counterparts. So cosecant is 1 over y, right? Would it be positive or negative? Yeah, positive also, because if the sine's positive. So cosecant will be positive. What about secant? Positive also, right? Because secant is 1 over x. And then cotangent would be as well. So they're all positive in the first quadrant. And negatives, there would be none. That will be the same for all of the quadrants, just not first one. Everything's positive in the first quadrant. Okay, quadrant 2. It's a little bit trickier here. Positive and negative category. So in quadrant 2, we're over here, it's going to be a negative x value, right? And a positive y value. So sine, start with that one. Sine, is that positive or negative in this quadrant? It's going to be positive, right? Because it's y. Y is positive in this quadrant. Negative x is positive y's. Cosine would be negative, because this is the negative x direction, right? So cosine is going to be negative. What about tangent? Yeah, negative, right? Because it's a sine and cosine put together. It would be a positive divided by negative, so it's going to be negative. Okay, and then we got, each of them have a match, right? Sine matches with cosecant. If sine is positive, then cosecant would be positive too, right? Cosine matches with secant, so if cosine is negative, secant is negative. And if tan is negative, then cotangent is negative. So those 4 are negative, sine and cosecant are positive. Quadrant 3. Work our way down the list. Is sine positive or negative? Yeah, it's negative because this is negative x, negative y. So sine's negative. How about cosine? Yep, negative also, because this is negative x and negative y. How about tangent? Yeah, tan's going to be positive because it'd be a negative divided by a negative. All right, and then we got cosecant. Well, that matches with sine, so it's going to be in this one. And secant also, because it matches with cosine. Cotan goes with tan, so it's going to be positive. And then our last one. So sine is y. Y is negative in this one, right? It's positive x and negative y. The sine would be negative. Cosine is positive because it's the x. What about tangent? Positive or negative? Yep, negative. So this would be a negative positive. Then with cosine, we've got secant, right? Sine, we've got cosecant. And tan is going to be. There we go. So those are the signs for each of the trig functions. So we're going to have some problems where it asks you like cotangent and the third quadrant, something like that. So that's what we're going to use this for. So make sure you have that. So you don't have to like rethink about it every time. The problems that we're going to be doing, it's going to be a delta math assignment, but I don't want you to start yet because we're going to spend a little while doing some problems. And you still are going to want to write them down. I'll like simplify them for you, but I'm going to show you on delta math here. The first two are going to be kind of warm-up questions. First two sections. The first one, you're going to use this table that we just made. So you're going to be asked a question here. You're going to have to identify the quadrant. Which quadrant? So we're given two clues here. The cosine is greater than 0. That means the cosine is positive. And in this, it says the sine is also positive. So then you're going to look at your little sheet there, this little chart. Where are both sine and cosine positive? Yeah, quadrant 1 is the only one where they're both positive. So we're just going to select quadrant 1. Next one. Where is secant? Secant is greater than 0, so that's positive. Cotangent less than 0, negative. So you're going to look at yellow chart. Secant positive, cotangent negative. Secant positive, cotangent negative, so it's going to be quadrant 4. So that's all you're doing in your first one. Pretty simple. Okay, next section. Again, you don't need to start on it yet. You'll have a lot of time to work on this. It is going to be similar to what we did last night, except you're just going to be picking out one of the trig ratios. And the triangle looks a little bit different. Here we got a right triangle. It's labeled O, M, and N. We're given a bunch of information. All of this is just basically identifying the triangle. So if you want to even draw it, draw it really quick. 35, 37, 12. Right. And we're asked what ratio represents the cotangent of N. So N is up here, and we're asked to find the cotangent. So the thing that makes this a little bit harder is you don't have like all of them written out and you just flip them. The cotangent. So what you're going to need to do is if you have all the ratios written out, it's great. But you will eventually need to memorize all these. I would just write out SOHCAHTOA and figure out what cotangent is. So cotangent matches with tangent, obviously, right? It's the opposite of tangent. So if tangent is opposite over adjacent, cotangent then is going to be adjacent over opposite, because it's flipped. So let's flip that. So then using N as our angle, the adjacent side is going to be here. All right, so this is the hypotenuse. And the opposite is going to be here, 25. So then the cotangent of N is going to be adjacent 12 over opposite 35. So that's what you're going to type in, 12 over 35. So that section is just going to be kind of some warm up on those ratios. What we did last night, except just picking out a single ratio. All right, now where the new stuff, putting together those two things in a single problem is what we're going to see in this next section. And I would write out a couple examples of this. We're going to go over several examples. I'll write out a couple. I'll tell you what to write here. So it says, given the tangent of theta is 7 over 24. Here, so I'm just going to write the tangent of theta is 7 over 24. And the angle terminates in quadrant 1. What is the value of the cosine of theta? This is like our warm-up question. We're given one ratio, and we're asked a question about another one. We're also given a quadrant. So what you're going to do in all the rest of the problems is you're going to draw a right triangle. Draw a right triangle. And just draw the same one every time. And you might want to write one of these down. You might forget it. I'm going to put the theta in the same spot. Right there. And I'm going to use the information that it gave me. So with Sokotoa, tangent is opposite over adjacent. So that means this is the opposite side. So opposite's here. This is my adjacent side. In order to answer this, I need to know what the hypotenuse is. So we're going to do the Pythagorean theorem like we did last night. 24 squared plus 7 squared equals c squared because it's the hypotenuse. So the main difference is you're not given a triangle. You got to come up with a triangle on your own. 24 squared plus 7 squared, 625. It's a little bit bigger numbers as well. And then we'll take the square root. And it will be a nice even number. It's going to be 25. C is 25. Now we got our third side, we can answer the question. What is the cosine? So cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So the cosine of theta, the adjacent is 24, the hypotenuse is 25. And then the last thing we have to consider is the quadrant. This is quadrant 1, so it's an easy one because everything in quadrant 1 is positive. But if it had been a different quadrant, like quadrant 3, then we would need to make it negative. So that's all we're going to type in. But again, watch the quadrant. Make sure there. Okay. All right, so that's that. We're going to do a couple similar to this, but I'm just going to do the next level has all of the trig ratios. So I'm going to do a couple of these because they're just a bit harder. Same strategy on all the rest of the problems. Again, just hang with me. Don't get started yet. So similar setup. I'm going to write this out. This is using an A instead of a theta, but it works the same. Says we're given a secant of A, it's 5 over 4. Angle A is in quadrant 1. So I'll do quadrant 1 again. We want to find the value of the cosecant of A. In the simplest radical form. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to start by drawing the triangle. So with this triangle, it uses an A instead of a theta. It doesn't really matter. We just call that an A there. Same thing as with the theta. And we're given the secant. So this is a little bit more challenging because secant is up here. But what is secant the opposite of? Right, cosine. So cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So that means this is hypotenuse over adjacent. So hypotenuse over adjacent. So that's the first thing you got to do is recognize that and then label it. So on here, the hypotenuse is be 4. The adjacent side is 5. This side is 4. We need to find the other side over there. So we're going to use the Pythagorean theorem. We'll call this one B. Doesn't matter what you call it. Call it A if you want to as well. So we have 4 squared plus B squared equals 5 squared. Alright. That's 16 plus B squared equals 25. And then subtract B squared equals 9. Subtract. So B is 3. 3. And now we can answer the question. What is the cosecant of A? So cosecant, then we need to think also what that one is. That's the opposite of sine, right? So it's going to be a hypotenuse over opposite. So cosecant of A, the hypotenuse 5 over the opposite of 3. And then the very last thing we want to check is the quadrant. This one happens to be quadrant 1 again, so that will be positive. There's a lot of steps going on in there, and these problems might take you a while. I'm going to give you plenty of time to work on them, but I want to just maybe go over one more. Maybe try to do this along with me and just make sure you got it. This one's it's a different quadrant, so maybe a little bit more careful. So we're given a cosecant, and we're supposed to find a cotangent. So the cosecant of A equals negative 11 over 12. Write that down. This is the quadrant 4. And we're supposed to find cotangent. So we're going to start by drawing a triangle. And we'll just put A down here, just to be consistent. Yeah. Wait just a minute. So then cosecant is the opposite of sine, right? So then this is going to be the hypotenuse, and this is going to be the opposite. The hypotenuse, don't worry about the negative for now, that just tells us that it's in that quadrant. So just going to label it 11, and the opposite is 2. And we need to find this side down here, which is A. So then it's going to be A squared plus 2 squared equals 11 squared. Now there's a lot of steps here. This becomes A squared plus 4 equals 1.1. Go ahead and subtract. A squared equals 117. Unfortunately, that's not a perfect square. So A is just going to be the square root of 117. This one. Now we can finally answer the question, what is the cotangent? So cotangent is the opposite of tangent. So it's going to be the adjacent over the opposite. So adjacents are here. The opposite of 117. The opposite of 2. Since it's in the top, we don't have to worry about rationalizing it. So we're going to do the square root of 117 over 2. We also just need to double check the quadrant. Yes, it's quadrant 4. So before you submit it, think about if the cotangent, so you can look at your little chart, cotangent in quadrant 4 is negative. So we do want to put a negative in front of it. And that will be it.